Welcome to a Leader's Journey podcast. I'm your host, Joel Gunn, and today I have with me a friend. He's actually up in Austin, Russell Grigsby. Welcome to the show.
Well, thank you.
It's good to have you, brother.
Good to be here.
Thanks for taking time out of your busy schedule to be with us today. Just before we went on the air here, you were starting to tell me a story about something that happened in your teenage years that really shaped and informed your leadership style. Let's go there first.
Okay, so I was blessed to be involved in Boy Scouts growing up. And I was already kind of an overachiever kind of kid. And for those that don't understand Boy Scouts, as you get older and they see something in you, they give you more and more responsibility. So I remember my first camping trip where I was given a platoon. I was given like 7 or 8 boys to be responsible for. It's a patrol leader is kind of what they call it. And so I was setting up camp for the first time as a leader. I was probably 14 and basically telling everybody what to do. Just going, okay, you do this and you do this and you do this. And they weren't paying any attention to me. And some of them were older than me. And I was pretty frustrated. It's like, here's my first opportunity to be a leader and I can't get anybody to do anything. And one of the adults came by and saw what was going on. And he pulled me aside and said, look, don't tell people what to do. Just go and do the job and invite people in and they will see you working and they will join you. And I thought, wow, that's very different. That's what I did. I just started setting up the tent or kind of pulling things together. And everybody started asking me, what can I do to help? As opposed to me being kind of the dictator leader, ordering people around. It was more of the person doing the work and inviting others to join me. And that process was very successful. I moved pretty quickly from being over, the 7 or 8 boys in this patrol to being over the whole Boy Scout troop.
Wow.
So within a year, I was the senior patrol leader over all of the Boy Scout troop. During that time, I've finished my Eagle Scout and kind of learned how to be a leader pretty young.
So just that little piece of advice, you took it to heart. Why do you remember why you were willing to go that direction? Were you just frustrated that nothing was working, so might as well try that? Or did something ring true?
It sounded right.
Okay.
You learn from mentors. If someone comes along and tells you, hey, I'm watching you and you might ought to try this. I'd already learned through jobs that I had that listen to your mentors. And so I did, and I practiced it. I got good at it. I from that point on, that's the way I led. I just got out there and did the job, and it invited people into it, and for the most part, they responded. And it was, it also works. People don't feel like some kids ordering you around. It's more of they're doing it with you. It's a servant leadership role.
As you moved into adult life and into career and leadership there, did it seem any different, feel any different, play out differently than it did in the Boy Scouts?
No, I think that was my style at that point. I learned to lead by doing and not expect people that work for me to do something that I wasn't willing to do. And so I think I worked jobs in high school and college and led youth groups and at churches and stuff like that. And I just learned that I was the one to step out and do what I wanted to have done and kind of show by example. And I think that I've used that style of leadership my whole life, to never ask people to do something you're not willing to do.
Do you ever run into resistance, peers or senior leaders that didn't like that style?
On occasion. but that was more of their issue.
Mm-hmm.
I would say part of the benefit of learning leadership early is you're given responsibility early. And so I had people working for me for most of my life that were older.
Mm.
And sometimes they didn't really like having someone much younger than them being the leader. And so, yes, I did have some take offense, but that's just, it's part of the cost of being a leader. One of my jokes or things I talk about is, when you're the leader, you're the shepherd over people, sheep bite. And so, it doesn't always go easily, but it's a better style. It's a better style for me to be more of a servant leader.
Mm-hmm. Do you remember about when you first heard that phrase, servant leader?
I don't think I heard that term until 15 years ago. Okay. I don't know where I got it from, but I didn't know that term when I was in high school and college.
Sure.
That kind of came more recently.
Now, your primary interest in life is coaching CEOs. We know each other through the C12 group primarily. Yeah. Although I hope we've become friends more than just through the C12 group. Sure. But as you're coaching your CEOs, do they struggle with this idea of servant leadership, or do you run into leaders that do too much? Like they almost find their identity in doing things instead of delegating. Is that something you run into?
Yes, I would say it's a tension to deal with. Your intention of being a servant leader, but also needing to delegate. So I constantly was, I'm better at some of these jobs. When I started my company 25 years ago, I learned the job by doing all of them, and so I had to learn to delegate. And sometimes the CEOs we work with, they're better at certain tasks technically than the people that work for them, and so they do have to delegate to people that don't know as much as them sometimes, but that gives people an opportunity to grow. So I think for me, I probably spend more time pushing people to delegate than I do to get them to step up and do the job. I think servant leadership is more common amongst the people that I work with.
Yeah.
And the challenge is letting go of control, letting go of doing the tasks themselves.
Are there any tips or tricks you've learned or mindsets that you've learned to help people learn to delegate?
I would, yes. One of the things I've studied over the years is looking at how people are designed, looking at myself primarily first, and then noticing how other people are designed. So I think I learned this when I was running a company, and it was growing really, really rapidly. And so I had to learn very quickly to give up tasks because it was too big. The job was too big. And so I did some, I would spend 2 to 3 days a year off by myself, processing through what was going on and listening and looking at how I was designed. And so I realized at some point, my best use is to be a visionary for the company, to look at where the company is going 2 to 5 years down the road, and to start building relationships and partnerships, and to turn the day-to-day over to someone that their design is to do the day-to-day operations. So when I look at or counsel with people that are running companies, I try to explain to them what makes your heart come alive. What are you passionate about? What are you great at? And so when you look at all the jobs that you're doing, try to do the things that you're great at that make you come alive. The things that are harder, that maybe aren't in your design, those are probably the things you need to look at delegating. So for me, I love the vision. I love the looking out in the future, but I was also come from a finance background, so I could get caught in the weeds of finance, but it wasn't my passion. So it's like I delegate that to a CFO, and I look at more of a business development role because that's what I became. And so if leaders can really become self-aware of what they're designed to do and to try to do the things that make them come alive and be passionate, delegate the things that are not, they will end up being much more effective.
Have you ever run into a leader that feels like they need to control something they're not good at? And then if so, how did you address that or work with them on that?
Yeah, I think I did that. I think a lot of leaders do that, is that, they're not self-aware. So I think there's different ways of managing your boss that some are more effective than others, but sometimes you just have to let them screw up, let them make mistakes and do the things that they're doing wrong, because it depends upon if they can listen or not. If they can take feedback from a subordinate, you should do that. But if not, sometimes you just have to tolerate it. Everybody's worked for a bad boss, or or someone that's not self-aware. And I really challenge people to be self-aware, to really look at what they're good at. What are they designed? What are they passionate about? What brings life? And
do you have any exercises that you encourage your people to go through?
Yes, I early on, and when I start working in a relationship, I ask people to write down on a sheet of paper what makes my heart come alive, specifically things in their job. Turn the paper over and write down the things that kill them, the things that really do not bring life, and to look at that and try to, over time, delegate away the things that don't bring life. So it's a great tool to help you become aware of what's most likely your design.
Is that usually the first step with you and somebody you're coaching?
My first step is to learn people's story.
Okay.
So when I sit down with someone, and it's literally, tell me your story, where you grew up, family life, the things that the good, the bad, and the ugly, what makes you tick. John Eldridge is one of my mentors, and he's like, you don't know a man until you know this story. So I start there. I think this is a good thing for people to even do with their direct reports. Find out about who they are, what makes them tick, what they're good at. I'm a big proponent in doing some sort of testing, so you kind of know people's personality that in your direct reports. So
something like DISC or Myers-Briggs or something.
Yeah, there's cultural index, Myers-Briggs, all of this test. I like to kind of know who the people are. So I start there. Tell me your story. I give them assignments, and one of my assignments is what makes your heart come alive, and then we'll talk about that at one of our meetings, so that when we're looking at what's going well at work and what's not, where they need to delegate, you can use some of these tools as guidelines on how to delegate.
And then how do you say they're not good at delegating? How do you coach them to do the delegation? Do you have words of wisdom around that? Is that
I don't think
is there a trick to that?
Yeah, I don't think you can make someone delegate. I think you can just point out that it's not working for them to keep holding on. It's like, you don't train up your team if you control everything. You train your team up by giving them more responsibility and letting them pass or fail. But you can't, go to a leader and say, you have to delegate these things. I mean, you can shame them, not shame, that's not a good word for it, but you can pressure them, you can call it out. You can't make it happen. But a good leader will delegate.
Yeah. So let's say somebody happens to be viewing this podcast and they've been sensing that they need to delegate. They go through your exercise, front of the page, right? The things that really fill my heart. Flip the page over, and the things that zap or kill me,
Yeah,
take away my energy. they get that done, where would you coach them to go next?
I think the first thing, you have to stand back and look at what this information is telling you. When I did it for the first time, this was probably 20 years ago, one of the things that killed me was meetings. Being in meetings where I did not have much influence, I just was there to be in a meeting. And it's like when I'm trying to design my life and someone wants me to come to a meeting and I realize I have no influence there, what's the purpose of it? I know that that is not going to bring joy to me. And so I think you have to kind of look at the big picture. It's like, what does this tell you about yourself? And how do you guide and direct your decisions to a life of more meaning and purpose and vision for who you're designed to be, and less just doing things because they're expected of you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I at the time I was on the board of multiple nonprofits, which is primarily people invite you to be there just to have you give money, but there's no value in the meetings, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I looked at that. It's like, I'll give the money, but I'm not going to be in any meeting. I'm not going to be in any boards anymore. So I just resigned from every nonprofit board at the time. It's like, what brought me life was mentoring men at the time in one-on-one settings.
Mm-hmm.
So if someone came up and wanted to be mentored or wanted to meet about something, I knew that would give me life. I would almost always say yes. So I could move, I would free up my time to do that I loved, and carve off time or say no to things that were not going to bring life to me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So back to the delegating. There's a book, I think it's called E-Myth.
Okay.
And one of the things that I love about that book is they're looking at, as a company's growing, how you decide who your next hire is. And so instead of having an org chart, it's more of a job chart. And you realize, for you as the founder, you may have multiple jobs. And so you might be for me when I started mine, I was the COO, the president, the CFO. And I looked at all these different jobs I was doing. And so when it was time, when we're growing so fast, I had to decide what's the next hire. I would look at all the different jobs I was doing and thinking, well, this one's the one that I need to give up next.
Mm.
It would make sense.
Mm-hmm.
And about every year I would be giving up a job and hiring someone to take over for that, or delegating that out.
Mm-hmm.
So I think learning, again, it goes back to what's bringing life, and you delegate the things that are not your best, that you're not your best at. I think Marcus Buckingham spoke at GLS Global Leadership Summit about 4 years ago, and he's like, don't try to be better at things you're not good at. Hire for that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, oh, that's what I did. I didn't know to do that, but
Mm-hmm.
that's what I did.
Mm-hmm.
I do think some people try to shore up all their weaknesses, and to me, it's like, well, that might be good at some level, but you're really should be advancing your strengths and
Mm-hmm.
hiring for your weaknesses.
Mm-hmm. Let's say a leader's listening and they don't have the resources to hire right now for whatever reason. How do they delegate with the current team they have and get that team to buy into taking on more work was what it could come across as?
Yeah, that's a great question, because again, you have to start by knowing their story and knowing what they're designed to do. And it makes more sense on who to delegate to if you know people's capabilities.
Mm.
At the same time, you might be looking at some job, and there's no good place to delegate.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where it gets harder.
Mm-hmm.
And, as you are aware with what you do at C12 as a mentor coach, is when you can't figure it out, then don't try to figure it out by yourself.
That's good.
That's one of the things that I think I didn't know when I was a young CEO. It's like, this is all up to me. I got to make the decision. And it's like, ultimately, that's not a great thing. Being around other people that can help you make a decision will make you better at making decisions.
Yeah, that's good.
So whether it's a board of directors, an advisory board, or a senior leadership team that you can trust,
Peer
I
groups.
don't think that you should be a lone ranger in making these. I mean, it may ultimately be your decision, but you should get counsel from other people that see the whole picture, because sometimes the decisions are really hard, and you may be have blind spots to know the right answer, and other people can help you.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned as a young CEO, you never really thought about that. Did you ever have somebody come up and say, "Hey, there's this great CEO peer group you really should join"? Um, in those years that you were CEO.
Yeah, I did get introduced to one called YPO,
Uh-huh.
and I went to a meeting, and I thought it was very marginal. Now, of
Okay.
course, this was 30 years ago,
Sure.
or 20. It was 1998, I think. Was And it was not very effective. Wasn't attractive to me.
Yeah. I'm
I,
sure they've
I would
raised
have.
sure
I mean,
they've
I
raised the bar
love.
since then.
Yeah, I love C12. It's like, wow, my life would have been different had I been in something like a C12 group.
Yeah.
It just wasn't available at the time.
Speaking of C12 and accountability to your peers, at least accountable enough to go ask the question, right? Again, you stated they can't tell you what to do. It's your business, not theirs. But to have those people around the table, what do you see? Do you see CEOs ever resist the feedback from their peers?
Um, it's a, Not often. With the groups that I mentor, they're close enough and trusting enough of each other that it would be foolish to ignore other people's advice.
Mm-hmm.
But there are some people that kind of come with their mind made up, but I don't think they're necessarily getting the best decision that they could
Mm-hmm.
make. So for the most part, I think that as you get in a peer advisory group and you're around other CEOs and you learn to trust their decision, you wouldn't be in a group if you wanted just to live your life on your own and make all your own decisions.
Mm-hmm.
So in a peer advisory group, people tend to be a little bit more open to input from others. Just the fact that they spend the time and money to be in a peer advisory group. I think for me, when I was running my company, I was probably pretty arrogant and didn't really think anyone knew anything like I did. And so,
Of course, if they were as smart as you, they'd have their own company.
exactly. So, I think, pride and arrogance gets in the way sometimes, but humility actually makes you better.
Yeah.
Receiving feedback makes you better.
What do you think? Changing channels here just a little bit. What do you think the biggest misconceptions people have about leadership?
I think, um, first of all, that it's like a leader is someone that just tells everyone what to do. Like they're in charge and they're in control. And I don't think leaders have as much control as people think they do. They have influence.
Mm-hmm.
Very. I did work for a person who was a horrible boss who did, he was like the worst potential boss you could have. Lots of control, lots of violence with his words,
Mm-hmm.
not very effective. He had control but no influence. And I think people think that that's what leadership looks like, is like a general in the army ordering people around. And I think the reality is a great leader is someone who influences, not controls.
Mm-hmm.
So my misconception, and I did it when I was, a young CEO, is I did kind of dictate.
Mm-hmm.
We were growing really rapidly, and you had to make decisions fast. I didn't take the time to get people's input. Now I'll look at it and watch other companies that are growing equally as fast and realize there's always time to get other people's input, and you will make a better decision that way. To be like I said, start off with a servant leader or an influencer, not a dictator.
You made a strong statement there. You said there's always time to get other people's input. There might be somebody viewing this podcast that says, dude, I'm already working 80-hour weeks or more. How can I slow down and get other people's input? What's your thoughts behind somebody challenging you on that?
Well, that's a rhythm. I did work 80 hours a week for years, and yet I had the rhythm of meeting with my senior leadership team individually every week. For an hour every day a week. And so there's always time to get input from other people. You do what you want, what you value.
Good point.
And so if you don't value the input, you won't get it. But if you do value input, it doesn't matter how busy you are, you'll get it.
That's good.
And I do think if you're a great leader and you know your people, you can pull people aside and say, hey, let's go to lunch. I need to ask you some questions. So I don't think you're ever too busy.
That's good.
To not get other people's input.
As you're thinking about and working with your leaders, what do you see as some of the greatest challenges they're facing right now?
Well,
work level, personal.
Yeah, I live in Austin, and for the last 5 years, the biggest challenge has been staffing across the board. I mean, up until this year, if I had everyone, I asked the question, how many of y'all are hiring? Everybody's hand would raise and no one could find people. And so it's really hard to grow a business when you can't hire people. Now it's different now because the economy slowed things down a little bit, but that's still a pretty big challenge. Right now we're in a lot of uncertainty in our economy. And so that's the challenge. Instead of, not staffing, now it's like, what do I do when my market might be, or my business might be dropping 30-40%? How do I shift? And that's probably what's challenging most. I still have clients that are doing well, but I do have a number of them that their business is off by 20-40%. And how do you cut expenses, navigate that?
How are they navigating, or how are you mentoring or coaching them as they navigate?
Well, everyone's story is different. So we have some that their business is down, but they're in an industry that can flip quickly to growth again. So that decision might look very different than someone that's looking at a down market for the next year or two. They may have to cut expenses deeply and keep the overhead down. There are some of them that are not willing to cut too much because they know they're going to need the people in a month or two. And they're just going to take a loss, or they may have just to hold on to people that are not going to be busy for a while. So every decision depends upon the industry, the future that industry is expecting, what their history is, what their plans are. If you're planning to sell your business, your decisions are going to be very different than if you're trying to buy or acquire other businesses. So it's all individual.
If someone's in the audience saying, I'm one of those business that's declining, and they're feeling a little helpless or hopeless or discouraged, or you have any thoughts or words for them?
Well, I think sometimes people that are looking at difficult things get a little paralyzed. And my challenge to someone that's looking at something like that is move faster. Let me give you an example. This is kind of a silly example, but I went to a retreat probably about 20 years ago, and they gave us an example. You had to make a choice between two things. Both of the things were bad, but one of them was less bad than the other. So we made a choice and we chose the less bad. And it led us to another decision tree of two bad things, but one of them was less bad. So we chose the less bad. And then we did it one more time. So three times we had to choose. And at the end of the choices, you're standing up waist deep in a barrel full of manure. And you look at this and go, that's the best choice out of all the choices we had. That's the best choice.
Mm-hmm.
And see, sometimes people go, well, I only have bad choices. Well, and by the way, on that example, all the other choices were worse than that. So we still ended up with the best choice. It was still not great, but it was better than all the others. I think sometimes people get paralyzed. They're going like, oh, I only have bad choices. It's like, well, still do the best of bad choices. It's like, oh, I may have to lay off 20% of my people. I don't want to do that. It's like, well, your other choice is to go bankrupt or to go out of business. So choose the best of bad and do it quick and do it, again, with advice, and don't stall. Don't get paralyzed, and just keep moving. And so my advice to people that are looking at things that are difficult is, you're only going to get bad to choose bad. You have to choose something that's bad. It's just going to be better than the other choice. So still do that. And I find that people that are willing to make cuts, to make the hard decisions, and they're painful because your people and you love your people, but they're painful. But the company survives, and some of the employees get to stay there. And if the company survives and it comes back around and grows, then you can hire some of the people back. But if you don't, if you get paralyzed because you don't want to make a bad decision, then you have a much bigger risk of your company not surviving.
That one thing you just shared, do you think that's it's the word discriminator, why some companies get big and some don't, or even go out of business?
Well, sometimes you go out of business that's completely outside your control. COVID shuts down, you can't go outside your house, and some companies did not survive that. And so that's not their fault.
Right.
But there are things that are going on right now where the economy's kind of getting a little tighter. Some businesses are not doing very well, or their volume is shrinking. The ones that will not be passive, that will make decisions, that'll cut expenses, that'll prepare themselves for the next season, will survive, and they might even grow and thrive. And others that are sitting there going, I don't want to do anything wrong, they just kind of get deer in the headlights. Then if you don't have profits, you don't survive. If you get yourself into trouble. So I do think sometimes it's outside your control, but sometimes it's not. And the ones that act with wisdom and with speed have a much better chance of surviving.
You used the word paralyzed a moment ago. What is it that paralyzes leaders in your experience?
I think sometimes they don't want to make a bad decision. I'm thinking of someone right now that their business is down, and they believe it's going to come back in a few months, and they agonized over cutting staff for months, and it's cost them hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Wow.
I believe they're going to survive, but with a smaller bank account than they could have had if they would have acted sooner.
Generally, leaders that are paralyzed, do you think that's in leadership? We don't like to use the word fear, although I've started using that more lately.
Everybody has fear. Sure. If someone says they don't have fear, something's probably mentally wrong with them.
Yeah,
because they're all designed for fear.
We just we tend, at least my experience has been around leaders, they tend to try to not put that word in their vocabulary. But sometimes you just got to call it what it is, So paralyzed because they don't want to make a bad decision. Unpack that a little bit more. I'm not saying it has to be fear. Fear doesn't have to be your answer, but what kinds of things are they afraid of? But I mean, in making the bad decision, what's the repercussions of making a bad decision? How does that affect them or their reputation? Is it a what do you think some of the drivers are if we dive down a little deeper?
Well, it's a fear of the unknown of the impact.
Hmm.
Like if you've got to cut 10% of your staff, you go, well, what if the business comes back? And so then I got to rehire, and there's a cost to that, and so you kind of get caught in this juggling of trying to choose again between bad things, and that's why having people come alongside you to go, you ought to move a little faster here. It does, for this one particular company, it might make sense to hold on to a few people.
Mm-hmm.
I will give you an example from my life. So
Okay.
I owned a stock trading business, and we had to pay a fixed cost for every trade. Well, the whole U.S. went from being able to trade 1,000 shares at a time to 500 shares at a time, and so our clients were like, "Well, you need to cut your cost in half, your price in half." It's like, well, we can't afford to do that because of our overhead. And so we were like, we could go out of business because of the rules change on the NASDAQ stock market.
Mm.
And we made a decision that we were going to figure out a way to cut our overhead, but we're going to charge our customers half of what
Wow.
they're being charged. We did it very quickly, like within a couple of days. A lot of companies around the US couldn't make that decision, and their companies folded, and ours increased drastically because people would come to us, and then we were able to lower our overhead even more to the point we were the low cost provider, and very few people could compete with us.
Mm.
And it happened because of a crisis.
Mm-hmm.
And we made a decision really fast, but we was very fearful because it's like we could be out of business in a week.
Mm. But it was the quick action that actually set you up for success.
The quick action not only set us up for success, but we were already a leader in the industry, and we went way ahead eventually because of that actions.
Mm. Wow.
It's complicated, but it was, that was one of the most fearful times that I had as a leader. It's like you show up and all of a sudden your whole cost structure is devastated. And so what do you do?
Mm-hmm. Speaking of what do you do, what did you do? Did you go get quiet? Did you sleep
Well,
on it? How'd you center in that
so
decision?
I talked to customers, large customers. I talked to my partners, and I talked to God.
Mm.
And as fearful as things were, I just had a peace that we were making the right decision. I didn't know how it was going to turn out. I just knew we couldn't stay where we were at.
Mm-hmm.
That wasn't going to work either.
Mm.
So I did get lots of counsel.
And what was the general consensus? Like, this is the best of the worst decisions, or you're a fool for going there? What do you
No,
recall?
I think the way it was different. My customers were ecstatic because it's like they could continue to do what they did for a living.
Mm-hmm.
My partners and I were like fearful, but then I started carving off on all of our expenses and meeting with our suppliers and everybody, all of our vendors, and getting their adjustments. And it took a while, but what happened was, where a lot of companies couldn't make that choice, their customers came to us because we
Yeah,
did.
you gained market share.
Yeah, we gained a lot of market share. We became one of the largest companies like ours in the U.S. Because of that decision.
Mm.
But it,
Have you had any difficult decisions to make since then?
yeah, tons.
Does it
But
get any easier?
it doesn't get easier, I mean, unless you're in a simple business. But some of the businesses I was in were not simple.
Mm-hmm.
So I would challenge people. I don't care who you are as a leader. Be around other leaders that you can bounce ideas off of.
Mm-hmm.
Have the kind of relationship with your senior leadership team that you can get feedback. Listen to what they have to say about things. Stop trying to lead. I mean, leading alone, that's a American myth. Our movies, all the heroes, all these men or all these guys out on their own doing stuff by themselves. It's like, that is a terrible model. The best model is people that are in community with other people that think, other business leaders.
Mm-hmm.
Listen to your spouse, listen to your senior leadership team.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to do this by yourself. In fact, if you do it by yourself, you will not go as far as if you partner with others.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think
Hundreds of times with the answer to your problem is someone else has it.
right. That's good. That's good. We moments ago you said something about making quick decisions, and one of the things that triggered for me was a phrase we hear a lot: hire slow, fire fast. And I'm not saying that the right solution in a bad economy is to fire anybody. So let me put that on the record.
Yeah, no,
That
I
is
don't
not
think
that's not what either one of us are recommending. But how do you respond to that phrase? Do you gel with that? Do you have an exception to that? Hire slow, fire fast. What are your thoughts?
um, well, I think people need to do a better job of making sure you've got a good fit on the hire, because it's so expensive to make a mistake.
Mm.
There are personality tests. There's different ways to test people. There's engaging more people in the hiring process to talk to them, and just do a better job of vetting people.
Mm.
The issue on firing is, I think sometimes that it doesn't work, but you're so fearful of for different reasons, and you just let poor performers stay a lot longer than they should. And I think there's litigation threats and those sorts of things as well.
Mm-hmm.
But I heard at the Global Leadership Summit again this year, one of the ladies that spoke said that a poor or even a mediocre performing employee in a team will take the whole team down a notch. It won't. It will affect your whole team.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like when you're laying off a poor or a mediocre employee, it's not just their performance. It actually drags down the performance of everybody
Mm-hmm.
that they affect. And I've seen that over and over again. One problem employee in a department causes a lot of drama for the whole department.
Mm-hmm.
So you really are protecting the whole team to prune people that are not doing well in the company.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think the litigious society makes us a little bit cautious in firing people.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like pruning in a plant, or it's going to make it a much more fruitful plant if you will do that. And I think, well, my experience is CEOs tend to extend grace much longer than they should, because they're caring, they know people's stories, but sometimes the reality is the job has just outgrown someone, or something's going on in their life that they're not able to do the job anymore, and that's not really helping your company to keep them in on the team.
Mm-hmm. Shift directions just slightly. Mindset was a word that came to me as you were sharing that. Talk about let's go to the CEO's mindset first. You've done a lot of reading. That's one of the things I appreciate about you. You also do a lot of personal retreats
Yep.
where you go get centered with God again, with yourself, and that's a big value for you. And one of the things I appreciate about you, you probably do that as good or better than pretty much anybody I know. Um, what do you how have you seen mindset, um, good or bad, uh, work for the CEO or for the leader? And what in your years of exposure and experience, what are some key attributes of those mindsets?
That's a great question. I'm going to answer it in a weird way.
Okay.
I actually saw a video on this morning. Um, a lot of people that are leading companies, that are CEOs, very driven people, very gifted, smart, are operating from a place of brokenness.
Hmm.
In fact, the video I was watching this morning says, look, if you have a traumatic childhood, there's this level of trauma in your childhood that's going to drive you to be an overachiever. Now, if it's too much trauma, it'll destroy you, but just enough will make you an overachiever,
Hmm.
which is my story.
Mm-hmm.
And the reality is what makes you this amazing overachieving CEO is brokenness that still exists. And so the mindset, what I work toward, is living a life of being better, like knowing where your brokenness is, where your weaknesses are, looking for ways to bring healing. Because even though I operated out of a lot of brokenness as an overachiever, I still made a lot of mistakes that I wouldn't have made had I been a more wholehearted, more healthy person.
Mm-hmm.
So my challenge to the people that I mentor is, even if you grew up with trauma and you grow up and there's places of brokenness, places that you're still not healed, go through the process of healing, because you'll be a better leader.
Mm.
Brokenness may have gotten you there as an overachiever, but it may not keep you there. And so getting to a healthier place mentally, understanding how to be healthy, how to lead in a healthy way, takes a lot of time and energy.
Mm.
And so my challenge to people is, it's like, because it's my story, I see it in others. It's like I try to coach them along the path of getting healthy through counseling or different things to read, resources, ways to look at themselves, so that they can have a mindset that's healthy,
Mm.
that's caring about people, that's not task oriented. I mean, I'm so task oriented, so driven. And my wife keeps telling me relationships are greater than tasks. It's like, yes, as a leader, what got you there as this task oriented, driven person needs healing so that you're more relational.
That's good.
I don't know if that's answering your question
Yeah,
fully,
no, that's great.
but my challenge is to realize the places that need some help and to dig into them.
Mm-hmm.
Your wife or your husband, if you're a task-oriented driven person, can probably give you some ideas of things you need to change. Mine
Yeah,
certainly does.
opposites do tend to attract, don't they?
Yes,
That's a good thing, I think.
it's got a sense of humor.
And I'm similar to you in that regard, very much more task oriented than people oriented.
Yeah.
Looking at the leaders though that you admire,
Mm-hmm.
are they more people oriented or task oriented?
The ones that look, at the end of the day, you have to look at what you define as success. And if it's just more money, those people tend to be more task oriented, but there's a lot more mess around them.
Mm-hmm.
I would personally, to me, leadership and success is more relational and caring for people. And I would much rather encourage people to be relational and for them to love and care for their team, their family. They will be a much happier, healthier person. They may or may not have the same financial results,
Mm-hmm.
but they'll be a much happier person. So my challenge to people is like, yeah, you could keep going and make a ton of money and then split it with your wife and you as you go through the divorce, and then you have half. Or you can learn to be relational, have a healthy family, healthy marriage, healthy relationship with your team, and you will be happier. Your life will be more fulfilling.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the challenge.
Yeah.
Like I said, a lot of CEOs are got where they are because they're very driven, they're task oriented, they're achievement oriented, but that's not necessarily what's going to keep them there.
That's good. That's good.
Or it's not going to keep them as happy in their life.
Mm-hmm. Last question, I think, for today. As you look forward, what do you see the greatest challenge for the next generation of leaders is going to be?
This is going to be a weird answer, but most people stop learning. We have a culture now that has a 10-second attention span, which isn't very geared toward learning.
Mm.
And for me, I've been a lifetime learner. I've read thousands of books, watched podcasts or listened to podcasts, watched videos, taken classes, all kinds of things. I love learning. This culture doesn't do that. They've been taken over by TikTok, uh, YouTube Shorts,
Mm-hmm.
short little videos that are entertaining but not educational.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that the biggest challenge for the next generation is they're probably more relational, but not much of on the to be a learner is very rare
Mm.
in our culture and for the millennial generation.
Mm.
In the same sense where it's like, well, how many books have you read and what's your how are you learning about leadership and management? And that's not common. And I think that's going to be a problem for this next generation is their attention span has gotten so short that it's hard for them to study and to grow, which is I'm not going to learn much about leadership through TikTok
Mm.
or through a little 5-second, 10-second video. I'm learning it by reading really gifted people, reading books,
Mm-hmm.
watching training videos that they've done.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I'm not saying it's every young person. I'm just saying as a culture, we kind of lost that.
Mm-hmm.
That's those skills.
Wow, that's thought provoking for sure. Anything we can do as leaders today to help those next gen leaders?
Yeah, the one thing that I do is mentor, like step into people's lives and spend time with them. Be a father figure or a mother figure for someone that's an emerging leader. The younger generation's very, very smart. They're very gifted. It's just that they've been entertained away where they could go. And for someone to step in and go, wait a second, I want to walk alongside with you and mentor you to help you become a better leader is going to be very critical. So I think that's what I'm doing. And I think that if you feel like God's calling you into leadership, then find some mentors that can coach you along the way. I've been blessed by having mentors in my life over my career that changed my life.
Yeah. Actually, I think I'd like to have you back on the show sometime to talk about mentorship in particular, because of I know a lot of people, but I haven't, excuse me, haven't met as many like yourself that have been blessed to have mentors.
Yeah.
So I'd love to hear your journey on that and just talk about that topic for half hour or more.
It's a great. I mean, we'll talk about it later, but I can look back and it's really 3 or 4 men that guided me early in my career that changed the whole trajectory.
So as we wrap up this show, though, I do want to close with one thing on mentorship. If a leader, somebody listening to the podcast or watching the podcast, if they felt like they were supposed to do more mentoring, how do they start that? Are they the ones that go out and say, "Hey, let me mentor you," or is it on the other person to come say, "I want to be mentored"? What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, this may be too long of an answer, but um, the way it worked for me is people knew my heart and the way that I've mentored people at my church. And I just got to be known as someone you could go to.
Mm.
Someone would say, "Hey, can we have coffee?" And then the word would get out that I met with Russell. This is what we did. Here's the challenge. And we'll go into a little bit more depth. I also have people that want to meet with me. They want something from me, but they're not willing to do the work.
Mm-hmm.
So I challenge people really early on. Are you going to listen to what I say? Or are you just here to try to get something from me?
Mm-hmm.
And if someone's not teachable, I learn really quickly, and I won't work with someone that's not teachable.
Mm.
So I invest in people, young men and women that are teachable. But if someone comes in, they want to tell me their story, and I give them a homework assignment, and they don't do it, then I'm not going to invest in that.
Mm-hmm.
My time, it's like I'm going to invest in the people that will actually get a return on the investment. I'm not, there's not a cost to me mentoring them.
Sure.
It's just me doing it because I love people, but I want them to put skin in the game with their time.
Do you ever find that you reach back out to somebody that didn't do the homework 6 weeks ago and say, "Hey, checking on you. You want to re-engage," or do you just leave that with them?
I just leave that with them.
Okay, good. Well, brother, thank you so much for your time today.
Sure.
I'd love to have you back sometime if that works out on our calendars. But been an honor and a privilege to have you here on the podcast. So thanks so much. You shared some great insights and really appreciate the wisdom that you are free to share, certainly in the circles I run in and with me, and it means a lot. So thank you again.
Thanks, Joel.
Yeah, we'll chat soon.